Okay, students, we are here to learn how to format dialogue correctly in our stories. And any good story, as you know, is going to have at least some conversation between characters. It's going to have some parts that characters are actually saying out loud, so we need to learn how to do this right. I'm going to walk you through 4 quick rules for how to format dialogue, and the first one is pretty hard to mess up. And it's that all words spoken go inside quotation marks, meaning anything anyone in your story says out loud needs to be inside quotation marks. So whether that's something like here, you can have some of my marbles, or pass the ketchup, please, hello, and goodbye. Any word a character says out loud needs to have those marks around it. Very simple. Rule number 2 is a little more complicated. Let's read the definition first, then talk about what it means. A comma at the end of the quote stays inside the quotation marks, but a comma before the quote stays outside of them. This rule is important because sometimes in the same sentence, you're going to say a combination of quote and non-quote. Something a character says, and just a note from the narrator that it's this character who said it. Let's look at the first sentence. "You're nothing but a dirty orphan," said the girl. Now you recognize immediately that this part is what the girl's saying, and this part is the narrator telling you that it's the girl who said it. So let's go back to rule 1. Anything the character says goes inside quotation marks. And let's look at rule 2 now, because there's something else we need to do. We need to show that there's a difference between this part, and we're going to use a comma to do that. Now, where's the comma go if it comes at the end of the quote? Inside the quotation marks. So, "You're nothing but a dirty orphan, comma," said the girl. And that comma at the end of the quote stays inside the quotation marks. And it's the opposite if we do it the other way around. So here, "said the girl" comes after the quote. In this next sentence, "Mrs. Nye said" comes at the beginning. And in that case, again, rule 1, anything a character says inside quotes. And in this case, because we're going to have that comma before the quote, it stays outside the quotation marks. So in each case, the comma shows you the separation between quoted part and non-quoted part. And if the comma comes at the end of the quote, it stays inside the quotation marks. If it comes before the quote, it stays outside them. This is maybe the trickiest one, but the most important, I would say. Let's move on to rule number 3. Okay, let's read it together. Question and exclamation marks at the end of the quote also stay inside the quotation marks. Let's just walk through this so you can see how it looks. "Stop, thief!" screamed the young man. You recognize that this part is what the young man is screaming. This part is the narrator telling you who is screaming it. Now, maybe you recognize, you sharp grammar wizards, that this is an exclamatory sentence. You can hear the young man yelling it at the top of his lungs. And rule 3 just says that for this exclamation mark at the end of the quote, it needs to say inside quotation marks. Let's look at the next sentence. "Which way to the restroom?" I asked the waiter. You recognize this is what I am asking. This is the narrator saying that I asked it. So, rule number 1, anything the person says inside quotation marks, and this interrogative sentence ending in a question mark needs to have the question mark where? That's right, inside the quotation marks. Give you a chance to look at that, make sure it makes sense. Then we'll move on to rule number 4. Thanks for staying tuned. Rule number 4 is important because in your stories, you're probably going to have conversations between characters, meaning you're switching back and forth between speakers. And rule number 4 says that when switching between speakers, always skip to a new line and indent. Let's see how this looks. I've written out a little conversation, I imagine, between Anne and Mrs. Nye. Mr. Nye, my bad. Mr. Nye says, "Good morning, Anne." Now, because we are switching speakers, we're going to skip a line and indent. Does that make sense? Skip a line and indent. So, we jump down here. Now my quotation marks are green. We'll change colors to represent speakers. And here's our second speaker. This is Anne saying back to him, "Good morning, Mr. Nye. What are you saying to the ducks today?" Now, we're going to switch back to Mr. Nye. So we skip a line and indent. Skip a line and indent. Mr. Nye says, well, and they were telling me a little bit about the work it takes for a waterfowl to adjust to winter temperatures. Interesting stuff. Once again, we're going to switch speakers. So we skip a line, and you guessed it, indent. This is what we do when we are switching between speakers, for as long as you have to do it. Anne comes back. How long have you been able to speak with animals, Mr. Nye? And you can see one more time we skip a line and indent. The better question, Anne, is how long the poor creatures have put up with listening to me. So there are 4 easy rules on how to format dialogue. Let's go through them one more time. Again, any words spoken in your story need to go inside quotation marks. Commas at the end of quotes stay inside quotation marks. Commas at the beginning stay outside. Rule number 3, question and exclamation marks at the end of the quote also stay inside quotation marks. And finally, rule number 4, when switching between speakers, always skip to a new line. Skip to a new line and indent. Skip to a new line and indent. New line, indent, new line, indent. And that is all you need to know for now about formatting dialogue in your stories. Thanks for watching.